Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the October 28th meeting of the Audit Committee. To help slow the transmission of COVID-19 and protect the health and safety of the community, City Council, as well as board and commission meetings, will continue to be closed to the public for in-person attendance. The public is encouraged to watch and participate from the safety of their homes to practice social distancing. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable Channel 6 and AT&T UVerse Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/MyGlendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called ScreenWeave and choosing, quote, Glendale TV, unquote, from the menu. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100. Public comments on the specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. Roll call, please.
Committee Member Ed Kashadurian.
Here.
Rosevart Nazarian.
Present.
Alex Parajon is absent, and Chair Zare Amirian.
Present. Next item, please.
Item number 2, business agenda. Report of Recording Secretary regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for the October 28, 2021 Audit Committee meeting was posted on October 25, 2021 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Excellent, thank you. Next item is oral communications.
Item number 3, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes. The committee may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The Audit Committee Chair may refer the matter to staff for investigation and report.
Do we have any phone calls on this item?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next item, please.
Item number 4, approval of minutes. A, minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on July 29th, 2021.
Okay, one of the issues that we are facing is we have a new committee member, and that committee member is Ms. Rosevart Nazarian, and welcome to her. Ms. Nazarian, I know you were not on the committee when this happened. Did you have an opportunity to view that meeting and review those minutes?
Yes, I have.
Excellent. So may I have a motion, please?
I will abstain from voting today because I was not sworn in for that meeting.
Okay. In that case, Ms. Varpetian, would it be proper to potentially move this item to later in the meeting? Hopefully, Mr. Parajon will join us, or maybe just move it to the next meeting?
Both options are good, Chair Marion.
Excellent. So we'll table this item for now and maybe revisit it at the end of the meeting. Can we move on to the next item, please?
Item number 5, action items.
There are no action items that I see. Next item, please.
Item number 6, reports and information. A, internal audit activity report as of September 30, 2021. Jesse Jong, Internal Audit Manager.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Audit Committee members. My name is Jesse Jong, Internal Audit Manager. This afternoon, I would like to provide you a report on the internal audit activities for the quarter ended September 30th, 2021. So as outlined at the beginning of our activity report, there are a total of 7 sections that provides a summary of what internal audit has completed in the past quarter. I will go over each of these sections. Section number 1 covers projects that we have completed during the past quarter. There are 2 of them, and this afternoon we have prepared 2 PowerPoint presentations for the 2 projects listed. The first presentation is PCI compliance audit. that was completed by our senior internal auditor, Samil Salim. So this time, we're going to do a full presentation for this audit, for the benefit of our new audit committee member and any public who is joining us for the first time. And I think it's always a good idea to have a refresher on the PCI compliance requirements. So with that, Samil, let me actually let me share my screen. Ready for you.
Hello. All right.
Oops.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Miriam and fellow Audit Committee members. My name is Samil Salim, and today I'm going to be going over the payment card PCI compliance audit that we just performed. First, the two basic acronyms that we talk about all the time. Payment card industry is referred to as PCI, and then the security standards, data security standards, is referred to as DSS. So together, they're often referred to as PCIDSS. So who sets these security standards? Essentially, all the 5 major credit card companies got together and established these security standards in an effort to prevent data breaches. So they're the people who set the standards. Why do we care about PCI compliance? Well, one is because it's required. Both the credit card companies as well other agencies can assess fines and penalties if you're found to be negligent, and those penalties can be quite large, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. They could terminate your ability to accept payment cards, and prevention is always cheaper than mitigation. There was a 2009 IBM study that found the average data breach was about $8 million per breach, because every record you have to do like credit monitoring and different mitigation records to show that you're doing what you can do to prevent the breach from basically exploiting. So as you could tell, like from credit monitoring, things like that, the costs can get pretty expensive pretty fast. So that's why it's very important to focus on prevention. So the different compliance levels depending on how many transactions you process in a year. The City of Glendale is a level 2 merchant, meaning we process between 1 and 6 million transactions a year. And the data security standards are broken up into 6 goals and 12 requirements. The goals are pretty commonsensical type of goals, and I'll just read them off on the left. Build and maintain a secure network, protect cardholder data, maintain a vulnerability plan, implement strong access controls, regularly monitor and test networks, and maintain an information security policy. And then I'm not going to go over each requirement, but like, for example, requirements 7, 8, and 9 restrict access to cardholder data on a need-to-know basis. So, only the people that process credit cards actually have access to it. Assign unique IDs to each person with computer access. So when you get a new system, you change the default users and passwords to make sure everyone is unique. And then you restrict physical access to cardholder data. So if you actually touch the data, you protect it, and then you destroy it in a expedient manner. So those are kind of like the goals and the requirements at a high level. So this is a picture of your average credit card, and I wanted to go over some of the elements in there to illustrate what is allowed to keep, what's not, and in between. So what's prohibited to keep is the chip information, the 4- and 3-digit codes, depending on American Express or if it's a different kind of credit card, and the magnetic strip. These 4 elements can't be kept under any circumstances. And what's prohibited, unless encrypted, is your PAN, which is your primary account number. That's a 16-digit number. That's also not allowed to be kept unless you have the adequate encryption. So like you have wherever they store this information, they've implemented the controls to be able to keep that information. You can keep the last 4 to 6 digits for identification purposes, but the whole 16-digit you can't keep unless encrypted. And then lastly, what is allowed to be kept is your name and expiration date. And usually this is kept for record keeping purposes. And why do we do these audits? One, it demonstrates ongoing compliance with the standards. 2, it lets us identify deficiencies timely. PCI is something that is not a one point in time where you're in compliance. It's something that really is a 24/7 operation that you need to be in compliance at all times. So the more timely you do these assessments, the quicker you could identify deficiencies and rectify them quickly. And then it helps us prepare for the annual audit that's done at the end of the year by the external auditor. And finally, it raises awareness amongst employees that PCI is important and that we take it seriously. So now in the specifics of this audit, the objective of the audit was to determine the city's ongoing compliance with PCI policy and procedures. And the scope was based on PCIDSS requirements as defined by the external qualified security assessor. That's basically our external auditor that comes at the end of the year and does their formal audit. We're fortunate enough to shadow them when they come out to learn new best practices and things like that. So that's how we defined our objective and scope. Frequency. So we do 3 audits throughout the year with the goal of covering all site systems and calendar tasks once throughout the calendar year. And I'll get into what each of those are a little later. The current audit, we looked at a total of 18 items from each of those categories. The audit process, we conducted site visits, performed system assessments on in-scope systems, and verified calendar events. And what are those? So for sites are basically all your in-person locations that you physically hand someone your credit card and then they process it. Systems is think of it basically your virtual payment, so like everything you do online, things of that nature. And calendar task. So the PCI team, they developed a calendar of events just to make sure that the city is on task with the various tasks throughout the year. So they formalized it in a calendar of events listing the various tasks throughout the year. And so when I verify this, I'm basically checking that we completed all the tasks in a timely manner. So those are the 3 site, system, and tasks. So those are the things that we looked at. The summary of this audit. So from the 9 sites that I looked at, there were 3 opportunities for improvements. The 2 systems, no opportunities for improvement. And then the tasks from the 7, there was 1 opportunity for improvement. And that dealt with a system, but it fell under the calendar of events, so that's why we categorized it under tasks. In total, so there were 4. The first one had to do with tamper seals. So every in-person location obviously has your credit card terminal and PIN pad. On those devices, there are tamper seals that we can inspect to make sure it wasn't tampered with, basically. So if the seals are broken, we could escalate the issue and stop using the device. So there are defined intervals in which we inspect these seals depending on where they're placed. So one location wasn't doing their tamper seal inspections and logging it into, this is an example of a log that they would inspect and then log in that we looked at the device on such and such a date and everything was clear. So that was the first one. Second one has to do with PCIDSS training. So before anyone can process credit card payments, they're supposed to take the applicable PCI training. So one location had a number of employees who haven't yet taken the training, but were possibly processing credit card payments. They were trained on how to use a credit card terminal. It's just they weren't trained for the PCI training. And so the recommendation for that was to obviously get them trained and not have them process until the training was taken, and they did do that. The third one had to do with PCI policies and procedures, departmental policies and procedures. So every department has their own PCI procedures where they document what are the types of payment card transactions they accept and which ones they don't. The one department that we looked at stated that they did not take telephone payments, and it's true, they didn't take telephone payments. But the city treasurer's office had a overall recommendation for departments to still state that they do take telephone payments just in case they need to process telephone refunds. They still have, this particular department hasn't updated their procedures at that time, but they did change it after we made them aware of the recommendation. Lastly, was one related to a system. So we have third-party vendors that process payments on our behalf. And the way the city gains comfort that these vendors are up to speed on the PCI requirements is we obtain from them something called an AOC, an attestation of compliance. That's basically a self-report on their end where they assess their operations, and then they basically say we are compliant with the standards. So we're supposed to get these on an annual basis, and they expire annually. So we had one third-party vendor who didn't prepare their AOC on a timely basis, so it was technically expired at the time when my review took place. And so they were working on it, and they did get us an updated AOC on time afterwards. So all four recommendations were remedied, so there was nothing to be carried forward, and everything was closed. With that, that concludes my presentation. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I believe we have someone from the Treasurer's office as well. Is Araz online? But if not, I'll do my best to answer the questions.
I'm here, some.
Oh, okay, great.
Excellent, thank you. Do any of my fellow committee members have questions?
Chair Miriam, this is Ed Kashadurian.
Mr. Kashdourian, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Mr. Salim, thank you so much for the report and the presentation. I have just one very quick question. You mentioned that these reports are prepared annually. Are these reports prepared because the city has to submit this to, let's say, the PCI or an authority that oversees it? Otherwise, who comes in to check the compliance? I mean, it's just like an audit process if like the regulatory agencies come in and say, we would like to see how you have performed these tasks, or could you just maybe help us understand this a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a good question. At the end of the year, when we do our formal audit, and that formal audit essentially dictates if we could process credit cards or not, this is one of the elements that they do look for, and it is part of the standards to obtain assurance that third-party vendors are PCI compliant. So this would be a violation if this was at the end of the year. So it was good that that we did obtain a current one now rather than the end of the year. So it is a requirement, and so that's why we look for it.
Okay, and to your knowledge, in the past, have you had any situations that the regulatory agencies have raised issues with the safety protocols?
What do you mean by the safety protocols?
Or any, like, they have flagged us for non-compliance or in the prior years?
Oh, in my experience of shadowing the external auditor, it hasn't come up yet, but like I said, it is a requirement, and it would come up if this took place at the end of the year. But there's also an element of reasonability. So I mean, COVID kind of threw everybody off track as far as timelines. So I'm sure there would be some leeway as far as how timely. Like it's very reasonable that some things are not being done exactly when they need to be done because of COVID and all the labor issues and things of that nature. So that would come into play, but it is a requirement, and it would be an exception if this took place at the end of the year in the formal audit.
I see. Thank you. And then my final question, if I may, you mentioned that we are based on the number of card processes. We are a level 2. We are at the level 2. Are we? And you mentioned, I wrote it down, 1 to 6 million transactions. If I'm not wrong, we are still in the neighborhood of 2 million transactions, right? We are nowhere close near the top.
Right. So so this is based on prior year levels. So because of COVID, our volume was actually much lower than normal. But our merchant banks advise that we maintain our same 1 to 2 million expectation, because it's not a structural reduction in volume, meaning like we didn't close facilities permanently. It was more attributable to COVID, and that we expect our volume to return to normal. So that's why we remained at level 2. But technically, our volume was much lower than that because of COVID.
I see. I mean, I guess my question was more towards the upper.
But our level was around 2 million.
To that, right? So we're not going to become a level 1 anytime soon.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khachdurian. Ms. Nazarian, do you have any question?
No, I do not have any questions this time. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I have one question. The goal is to cover all of the in-scope sites, systems, and tasks. And so you separate that into 3 total audits, or 3 separate audits?
Yes.
Okay. Has there been any thought to revisiting some prior sites, some small percentage of prior sites, or reviewing small percentages of prior systems in in audits, so that it's not just a once a year type thing?
So do it more than once a year, like a repeat throughout?
Yeah, I'm just thinking in terms of ensuring that the findings that you've found, or that systems that were good when you visited them earlier in the year are still compliant. Right. I don't think it necessary to repeat all of them every single time. Obviously, that would belie your resources and time. Right. But maybe choosing a small sampling from each prior group randomly and revisiting those, I think might be beneficial. And it'd be interesting also, just from our perspective, to see is everything in compliance, because it's a snapshot. Basically you're taking a snapshot in time. Just a thought.
That's definitely a possibility, but there's there's opportunity cost with what you're not doing in that case. So that I would defer to maybe Jesse to.
Ms. Yang?
But then the external QSA will do the final one at the end of the year, so that's twice already. And then also prior to the external QSA on site, we have provided a list of past findings to the Treasurer's Office, City Treasurer's Office, so that they can share with all departments, and then to make sure that those similar issues won't happen.
Excellent. Yeah, PCI compliance is one of those things where I think Mr. Salimi mentioned, prevention is far more cost effective than mitigation or dealing with the fallout of, something that's occurred. And it's so generally simple and straightforward to be PCI compliant that you forget how devastating it is if something does happen. And so, I know because I've been caught up in multiple data breaches from different, things back from UCLA, I think was one of the first large scale, data breaches that happened 20 years ago, to, things that have been happening recently. So I'm happy to hear that the city of Glendale is taking this and treating it as seriously as it deserves. Thank you.
Yeah. One thing, Chair Marina, one thing I forgot, I apologize to mention earlier, I meant to say, especially for the new committee member, when it comes to when I discuss like the PCI findings, like I leave out specific departments and locations because we don't obviously want to advertise that. So like in case, a question ever comes up, like who, what, where, we can't really get into that. So I forgot to mention that, but just I thought I'd throw that out there just for her purpose, for her benefit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Not only does it, I think rightfully protect, the privacy of some of the people involved, but really you don't want to advertise exactly where your weaknesses are,
Right,
especially when you have something like this. So
Thank you for the additional information.
yeah.
And also,
Ms. Sheng.
I think we will, as you suggested, if we can do it more frequently, we will think about it and talk to the city treasurer's office, talk to the city's PCI compliance team, and then to see if we can, because currently the 3 audits, we divided the total population up one third approximately. But there is a chance that we could just cover them all each time. Or do some random surprise check, as you said. So we'll think about your suggestion and probably discuss that at our annual risk assessment meeting, and to see, to include that in our next year's audit work plan.
I have one question. Is that okay, Mr. Chairman, to ask now?
Ms. Nazarian, yes, please.
Yes, okay, so the presentation was great, and what question that I have is that this PCI, for the data breach purposes, the external auditor, do they just review your report or they do their own reporting?
So
Go ahead.
sorry. So the internal audit is part of a citywide PCI team, which includes the external auditor, information services department, and city controller's office. So that's one avenue where all the information is shared amongst the team to make sure everyone is up to speed and on the same page. We also share our audit findings with them as well as the city treasurer's office. So yes, they are in the loop, and they do provide feedback as not only to the findings, but also as far as the magnitude of the findings and things of that nature. And likewise, we also have visibility to what the external auditor finds, not only through the actual report findings, but by shadowing her when they come out at the end of the year. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Samil. Moving on to our second presentation today. So GPD injury prevention analysis. This is a data analytics project that was requested by the police chief during our annual risk assessment meeting. So it is a very interesting subject, and Ani did a wonderful job on using data visualization to present the data, and hopefully the information in this analysis will help the police department with their injury prevention efforts. So let me bring up Ani's presentation.
Thank you, Jesse. Good afternoon, Chairman Amiri and committee members. My name is Ani Antonessian. I'm an internal auditor in the finance department. Today, I'll be reviewing a special report that we worked on for the police chief. The objective of the analysis was to review available data to identify risk factors that increase common injuries within GPD to potentially reduce injuries. So to perform this analysis, we had to find an injury database, and currently GPD doesn't keep such a database, but when an officer is injured on the job, a workers' comp claim may be filed with a third-party administrator that handles the claims for GPD. So we relied on the TPA database to perform this analysis. The objective of the project was to identify risk factors for common injuries within GPD, to improve injury prevention, reduce workers' comp and overtime costs, and extend the career of officers. And the scope covers the 10-year period from fiscal year 2012 to fiscal year 2021. To do the analysis, we researched publicly available studies to identify risk factors that had a correlation to law enforcement personnel injuries. We also interviewed city staff, HR, GPD, as well as vendor staff to gain an understanding of what officer injuries are like and obtain the claims database. And finally, we performed analytics on the claims database to obtain injury statistics first, and then to delve into finding patterns with injury risk factors. These are questions that will guide the presentation and those that will answer in this presentation. So how many injuries are there and how much did the claims cost? What are some common injuries that we saw? What are the main causes of injuries? What are the most likely injured body parts? And what are those common injury risk factors that we came across? So the first one, how many and how much? Before we get into the risk profiling that we performed, I wanted to give you a sense of the injury claims and the associated costs. Although we performed a total of 14 analyses, we will only highlight some of them during this presentation. We reviewed 647 claims, and those were filed by 252 officers in the past 10 fiscal years. This chart shows you that police officers filed the most claims, followed by police sergeant and police lieutenant. As a general side note, when we refer to the term officer in this presentation, it refers to all of these positions. So they're all sworn positions except officer recruits. This gives you an overview of the total cost. So these 647 claims cost $23.5 million over the span of 10 years. And on average, we got about 65 claims per year. We also wanted to understand the officer perspective, so how many officers are injured every year. There were a total of 252 for the 10-year period, and what this graph shows is that on the orange line here, you see the number of injured officers every year, and that is always lower than the number of claims we get. So this tells us that there is at least one officer that files one or more claims every year. And to kind of break down this understanding of injury, the state code breaks down injury into two different groups. There's specific injuries that result from a specific one incident, and there's cumulative trauma, which is repetitive mentally or physically traumatic activities that extend over time. So whenever we present these separately. And what we see is that although cumulative trauma has total lower cost, the average cost of cumulative trauma is 172% higher than that of specific injury. We also wanted to see what types of claims we get. So this gives us a breakdown of the 23.5 million into the different claim type buckets. The costliest category that carries half the cost is future medical. These are the injuries that require ongoing lifetime medical treatment. The next costly category is indemnity claims. This is what you get with temporary disability, permanent disability, and these usually result in loss of time from work. The next category is the medical only, and this is just when an officer is injured and they only receive medical treatment for a specified amount of time, but they don't, but they go to work. And then finally, there was one first aid claim, and this is where there's only one medical visit with one follow-up visit. So next we can get into, what were the common injuries that were sustained by officers. And we see on the right side, strains are what we saw the most. There was also no physical injuries, so these are psychologically caused injuries, sprains, lacerations. The costs associated with it is, the ones that you get most frequently don't cost as much. It's one of the outliers that run the costs up, like fracture, hearing loss, cancer. These were, 36,000 on average, or 50,000 for fracture. And then what are the causes that we get these injuries? So the specific injuries, we see physical movement, the officers climbing, stooping, bending, right? Robbery, assault, another major cause factor, being hit, struck, caught by object, psychological causes, exposure to dust, gas, fume, electrical current contact. Then in the next group, the cumulative trauma cases, what we saw from the database that they were just straight under cumulative trauma. There were no specifics. But then for some of the cases, you see repetitive motion, continual noise, and psych factors, etc. And finally, we also wanted to see what are the most likely injured body parts. For specific injuries, what we saw is there were 479 that we looked at. The top most likely body part were multiple body parts that were involved in the injury. It was 19%. Then the knees, followed by lower back, shoulders, fingers. And for cumulative trauma, you see that the multiple body parts, again, are the top factor. But there are also the ears, lower back, feet, and the heart that were injured. And finally, these next two slides will focus on what this data told us about what are these top risk factors that increase the risk of injuries. And before we get into those factors, I wanted to say that we did review 17 studies, and from these studies we gathered 23 risk factors that were correlated to law enforcement personnel injuries. And the way we determine that there is a correlation is if we take a risk factor like body armor wear. We looked at the entire list of cases, and if it was referenced in 5% or more of the claims, we said there is correlation. If it was referenced in less than 5% of claims, we said there is no correlation. And if we didn't have data, we said that correlation can't be established. So the top factors we saw, this one actually wasn't from a study. It was just looking at the data. For specific injuries, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 45% of specific injuries occurred on these 2 days. We saw the more than 20 years of experience group, 32% of injuries happened with this group. Every time I was looking at the cases, I saw suspect, an officer dealing with a resisting person, inmate, and it was 30% of injuries. Up to 5 years of experience, newer officers were also a risk category. Incidents occurring during training, also considerable portion, 17%. And finally, motorcycles. Quite frequently, every time a motorcycle was involved, there was a higher risk. And these are the top factors, so 5% or more claims had these. We also, as I said, had some factors that we've put in the report that were in less than 5% of the claims, and also those that we just don't have the data to say anything about. So to kind of conclude this analysis, you know, we were able to perform this very basic type of risk injury analysis, risk factor analysis, because the data had limitations. The existing data had data quality issues, and we've spoken with the vendor as well as HR, and they're going to be making improvements to the existing database and going forward. And second, as far as the injury profiling goes, we've put all of the risk factors and put a data quality check next to it if we felt, if that specific risk factor was reliable, so it was categorically collected in the data set. It has a green one next to it, and then the blue and yellow 2 and 3 categories were unreliable because we had to do a lot of manual review, and there was subjective interpretation involved, so it wasn't as reliable. And finally, the risk factors with the red 4, the data wasn't available. So we have these 2 findings about data quality, and we recommend that if this type of analysis is valuable for GPD, that they work with the TPA to track perhaps more risk factors, or track these injuries internally instead of relying on a third party, and also to track the current factors in a reliable way, so that future analyses like this can be more reliable. This concludes my presentation. We have representatives from GPD, Deputy Chief Tim Feely, and Danya Portillo, Workers' Compensation Administrator from HR, as well as Matt Doyle, HR Director, and myself to answer any questions that you may have. I also wanted to add that while working on this project, I got to see up close how truly dangerous policing is. And I just wanted to thank all the GPD officers that risk their lives to protect us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Antonessian. And I wholeheartedly concur with that last statement. Questions from my fellow committee members?
Yeah, I have a few questions. This is Nazarian.
Ms. Nazarian.
Yes, the question that I have is that you said that there were 45% of risk factor happening Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Is there any reason behind that?
Right. I would actually defer that. So we looked at the risk factors, but we didn't dig into the necessary, like, part why. So I defer to the Chief Feely to that question. I think you're muted.
Chief,
Tim, you're muted.
We cannot hear you.
Can't hear you.
Cannot hear you.
we can hear you.
Okay, why don't we give him an opportunity to figure that out? Is it possible that it's on our end?
Let me check.
Because I can see the deputy chief's mouth moving, but unfortunately.
Chair Marion, members of the committee, I think you
Yes,
can answer
Mr.
that
Doyle.
question. As I understand it, the assignment or the scheduling bids are based on seniority, and the one of the more common day shifts occurs on that Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe. Therefore, you'd have more senior officers working during the week, during the daytime, and a lot of these injury factors are age-related. So the more senior officers tend to be the older ones, and that I believe is the reason for the Tuesday, Wednesday prevalence of injuries. And I don't know, Chief Feely, if you want to nod your head. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. So simply eliminating policing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays won't mitigate.
Day off.
Okay. Okay.
That also explains
Deputy
why
Chief
it says
shaking his head. Ms. Nazarian, yes.
Yes, sorry. So that explains the other reason, risk factor, it says officers more than 20 years of experience, they are more injured. That kind of connects to that Tuesday and Wednesday explanation as well. Thank you.
Mr. Hashdurian, do you have any questions?
Chair Amirian, I actually have a quick question
Sure.
for Ms. Antonessian. Thank you so much for the presentation, Ms. Antonessian. It was very interesting to see the numbers and actually hear about the difficulty of policing. I was a little bit confused, I think, when you were talking about the correlation. I believe you mentioned that you had looked at 17 different publications and had identified risk factors and then tried to compare the risk factors to the ones that were reported within our police department. I guess my basic question is that did you set the percentage of determining whether or not there's a correlation at 5% level? Could you maybe tell us if there was a higher correlation? Like, what was the highest correlation that you saw between our cases and the cases that you reviewed in that 17 publications? I guess I want to see if there's a way we can find, a leading factor in terms of these risk factors.
Sure. So the studies were varied, the 17 studies, and most of them did not have a percentage necessarily of correlation, but just top risk factors that were gathered from different analyses. And we have the analyses listed in the report. They were publicly available. But in terms of the reason why we chose 5 is just the distribution of the percentages for the 26 risk factors. If we take a look at Appendix 6, it seemed like 6% and above, and with my manual review of the cases, it showed that those are the top risk factors. And then you have a lot that are basically 5% and below, and those just seem like they weren't a huge percentage of the population.
So is it safe to conclude that it is very difficult, if not impossible, to identify, primary risk factors that are with a high degree of correlation with what we see in either the existing studies or elsewhere?
I think there were 2 ways that we thought about doing the study. One way could have been not even looking at outside factors, just looking at your data, and you do see patterns, and we saw those. So those Tuesdays and Wednesdays factor, there's no study that I came across that specifically looked at whether days of the week have any correlation, right? So that's something that jumped out of the data for us. In fact, the more than 20 years of experience also was a very Glendale-specific factor, or the suspect involvement. Some studies get very specific about the risk factor that they articulate. It has to be, for instance, an officer arresting a suspect, right? So I would have to go into the database and look for specifically those words, which can constrain the total number that I can correlate with. But if I just say, okay, I'm just looking at the word suspect in my search, it broadens the search. So we get higher correlation when we actually try to make sense of the data for ourselves with our own determination instead of relying on studies sometimes.
I see. Thank you. And I have another question. This is only for my own personal sort of clarification of this issue. I think somewhere you mentioned that your report covers the dates from 2012 through 2021. And you also mentioned that you reviewed 400 plus cases that was filed by 200 officers. Do you know off the top of your head if this is really the cumulative number when you go back to like 2012 through now? This was the 400 filed by 200 and some officers. I guess my follow-up question on that would be, do we have an average number of officers that you know, served Glendale during that period of time on an annual basis?
Right. So the sworn number, I would hope that the chief would be able to provide. If I'm not mistaken, is it around 200 or so? Or?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Deputy Chief Feely.
Yeah, right now we're at 244, but we varied. So from that date period, we actually were at almost 275 at one point to where we are today. So you're talking about a lot of officers within that period of time. It's not a constant number.
I see. So it's not very helpful if we try to maybe set up a ratio of cases by like number of injury cases per officer, because that number will also change.
If you broke it up by each year individually, you could look at like this year, we knew we had this many officers for this 12-month period and you had this many claims. So you could probably try to do that. That would try to take a lot more gathering of data, because we'd actually have to go back into our records to show how many officers we had back in 2012 at that specific time.
Oh, or maybe going forward, I'm just trying to see if there is a way you can create an indicator that is the easiest way for you to maybe check to see if something is off balance in 1 year. And that was the question. I was trying to see if there's any way we can come up with indicators for something like this. I think that answers my questions. Thank you so much. I don't have any other questions at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Khashdurian. I imagine, and this question's open to either Ms. Antonessian or Deputy Chief Feely, I imagine there are overlapping causes as well. You know, senior police officer riding a motorcycle on Tuesday dealing with a suspect, for example. I'm just throwing that out there. Have you looked at those types of intersections between the data that you've analyzed?
That's an interesting point. No, this is the first time this kind of analysis was attempted, so we tried to go with as basic as we can, because the data has so much reliability issue. But definitely, just looking at this, you know, you can imagine someone on patrol who has more than 20 years of experience on a Tuesday, right? I mean, those factors come together. There's so much that can be done with this type of data, but you need to categorically collect it to reduce that subjective bias that someone is going to go and analyze and, right? Because you're looking at a database where during injury intake, the staff use a drop-down menu to pick the cause. And that needs to be constantly and reliably done for us to go back and do this type of analysis reliably.
I mean, Deputy Chief, I imagine you look at the quantitative data, the actual data, and you can probably in some way qualitatively confirms some things that you already know based upon your experience. Am I right there?
Yes. Yeah, I don't think the study was a surprise. There's a lot of stuff anecdotally we've been aware of. You saw a couple things in the study. Cumulative injury was the cause. Well, that's because a person that's had a career in law enforcement wearing a vest and a belt and doing the things we do, that will lead to a potential back injury. So it's not always a specific fight with the suspect. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's a career worth of carrying this gear that has caused it. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to hone in on, if that's things that we can change. And over the past few years, we've actually tried to change the configuration of our equipment to alleviate some of that weight and try to change some of the ergonomics. And we actually wouldn't be able to see that yet because that's something we just started. So anyway, to answer your question, yes, we have kind of seen these things through the years.
And are there any, I mean, I've had the profound honor and pleasure of not only knowing many of the Glendale police officers that currently work, but also, training with them both in strength and conditioning and in jujitsu. I imagine, training, while there are instances where officers get injured in training, a lot of these issues could potentially be mitigated through more training. Am I off base there?
What type of training are you talking about? Like strength training and physical fitness type training, or
I think training in general. I think for example, I see hearing loss as a cumulative injury, and my guess is that occurs from police officers training to use firearms, and that most of that cumulative damage occurs because there's periodic training with firearms. And so proper procedures and training for officers in terms of what type of ear protection they use, whether they're using both plugs and outside ear protection. I think those types of things can mitigate these types of cumulative injuries. And of course, physical training is one part of it, or being able to deal with stuff. But I'm just wondering if this report gives you any insight, or is there something that you would like to see more that would help the leadership of the police department come up with ways to mitigate some of these injuries?
That was our whole goal in asking for this audit, was to look for exactly what you're saying. I think this first gathering of data got what you saw in this report. It's a lot of information, and putting it together, the systems weren't really created to collect the data that we need now to make this analysis. So it's kind of whatever you put in is what you get out. So yes, we are looking for ways to help alleviate some of those injuries. This specific study didn't show us things like you're saying of do we need to change our hearing protection? Do we need to, a lot of it was kind of around a wide variety. So I don't think we were able to identify one thing that we were able to say, okay, if we just change the configuration of this, we'll have less injuries. That being said, those are things that we're changing. Even the vehicles, now we're driving Ford Explorers as opposed to our Crown Vics. So there's a lot less, we don't have to get down as low and get out. So you're changing, again, the ergonomics of our job. So hopefully within the next couple of years, you'll see some of those cumulative injuries go down. And just like you mentioned, the ear protection we use today is far different than the ear protection we had 30 years ago. So that is something that we are seeing improvements on. So you are correct that we are getting better at that. And so we constantly are looking for ways to improve.
And Chief, what would you like to see in order to take the information from this audit? Let me think of how to ask this. How can internal audit and the audit committee be more helpful in helping you determine some of those causes so that they can be mitigated? What improvements would you like to see, or what improvements suggest that maybe, because I think this report was great, what else would you like to see that would help you as the police department's leadership determine, kind of these root causes so that you can continue to make these changes and protect our officers?
I agree with you. I think the report was great. I think the problem is the collection of the data. I think one of the things that we're running into is you're finding the officer, when they go to the doctor, that's now a medical report, and they're reporting to the doctor what their injury is and how it happened. We have a pared down version of that when it gets to the city. So again, we don't know exactly when they talk about cumulative injury, what was it? Is it getting in and out of the car? Was it hearing it? So I think there's a lot of the smaller things that we don't have that I don't know if audit is able to actually acquire, because I believe that a lot of this is going to be in the medical report when they're actually seeking medical treatment. I think, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the data that was found is stuff that we anecdotally kind of knew throughout the years and we saw, and that's what you're already seeing us improve. So I think the study kind of did reinforce some of the things we were aware of and help that we're trying to change. So as far as what I want more, I don't know if there's anything more this study could have provided. So I think we're in a good place. I think we are learning from our mistakes or learning from, we're evolving as a profession, and this just helps us to kind of identify a couple more things.
Thank you. And Mr. Doyle, I mean, I know that, you know, in HR, you probably collect information about injuries as well, you know, to departments outside of police. And I imagine it's probably less, you know, there are fewer categories of potential injury causing things because maybe an office job might not be as dangerous. I'm not suggesting it isn't, but it might not be as dangerous as a police officer's job. Is there anything that you can think of, you know, other than just better or more complete data accumulation that might help both you as HR, the city management, the city council, and the police department leadership, that might help them have better insights, not just confirmation of feelings and their experience, but better insights that can lead to actual better processes or better training or better equipment?
Yes, Chair Marion, members of the committee, I largely concur with what Deputy Chief Feely said. I think it's all about looking at the data, learning from learning from that data, and adopting appropriate preventative measures to ensure that we're able to mitigate these situations in the future. We do have a workplace safety unit that my department works very closely with. And when we do see patterns of injuries, we can communicate with the safety professionals and put forth the necessary training to again help mitigate those types of damages. You mentioned the injuries that occur outside of the police and public safety in general. We get a whole range of injuries. It's just amazing. From you talk about office injuries. I mean, there are all kinds of things that happen in the offices. Carpal tunnel being a very, very common type of thing, and that was a significant category of our injuries 20 or so years ago. It seems like with better office furniture, better design of desks, things like that, we're seeing less of those. But really, I think it's all about the data and learning from that data and seeing what we can do. But we get a whole variety of things. And remember, everyone, the police and fire departments get a lot of attention on this, but we have other departments with employees who are doing all kinds of hazardous duties in our water and power department, our public works department, our community services and parks department. These are people that are doing very arduous tasks and very prone to injury. So we're having to pay attention to a lot of lot of those situations. And again, it's all about, good, having good data and employing that data to address the risk that occurs every time somebody walks into, begins their day here on the job. I mean, unfortunately for us, city governments do have a lot of employees engaged in some very hazardous, arduous duties. And again, I'm not talking about those of us who sit in the offices all day, but really the people that are out there, operating heavy equipment, climbing power poles. These are tough jobs, and again, having the data, having the training, having that information, and employing appropriate risk management is something that it's a part of everyone's job and something that we have to continue to focus on.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mr. Doyle. And by no means did I mean to suggest that there weren't other areas of work here in the city outside of fire and police that were that incurred injuries or danger. I appreciate everybody at the city and the work that they do. And you mentioned climbing fire poles. I did like your analogy to carpal tunnel, and so that's a kind of a single cause. You see carpal tunnel injuries, you start to collect good data on it, you identify how to mitigate it through better office furniture, the positioning of the keyboard, the training your office staff on how to sit at a desk or even stand at a desk, for example. So, and then you see a correlating drop in carpal tunnel injuries. And so you can say, you know what, that was a cost-effective thing that we did. We collected the data, we identified the root causes, and we addressed them, and we dealt with that issue. I think the difficulty, that police and fire, and even you talked about some of the public services face, is that they're doing multiple dangerous things anytime that they have, anytime there's a traffic stop, there's a variety of dangerous things that can potentially happen. And so I think collecting that data becomes even more important, because then you can see where the nexus of those factors are, and then potentially begin to qualitatively think about what are training practices, equipment, processes, procedures that can be put into place to mitigate them. And I have no doubt that Deputy Chief Feely and the rest of the police department leadership are already doing that and implementing that. This just goes to a little bit, in my mind, this idea of calls for defunding the police, how ridiculous that is. I think police can use more funding, quite frankly, and they can use more efficient and better training. They can use better equipment, and a lot of those things will help mitigate some of these costs, I think, in the long term. It's just a matter of tracking that information. So I very much appreciate, Audit for putting this together. And look, I just want, as the chair of the Audit Committee, to make sure that the city understands that, for me, this is a priority. One of the reasons why Glendale is such a great place to live is because of the work that our city staff and employees do, especially our police and fire, especially our public works, every department. So I just want to make sure that internal audit and Ms. Flynn understand that this is one of those things that I think is a priority, and anything that audit can do to help illuminate that, whether it's through best practices in terms of collecting data, whatever the case might be, asking the right questions, that be made available to you and your staff in order to help answer those questions.
Chair Amirian, may I make also another comment?
Sure, Mr. Khachdurian.
Yes, thank you so much. This goes back to Chief Feely's statement regarding how difficult it is to collect the data. Yes, I agree. But I'm looking at the numbers that was reported. 65 out of 240 on the force are expected to file an injury report in any given year. That's like somewhere between 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 police officers. I think that number is I don't know, but collecting that number, I guess, is an important, piece of, I think, decision making, because if you compare that number to other cities with the similar, I don't know, population size or police force, could give us some guidelines as far as what we can do. Right now, it's at 27%. Maybe if we can start collecting that number, we can maybe set a goal for the future to reduce it to 25%, to 20% down the line. And one way that comes to my mind, if somebody had given this to me as an exercise, my recommendation would have been go back to the past 3 or 4 years and see if we have any outliers, because those are the easiest to address. So, for example, if we have 1, 2, 10, 15 officers that are exposed to these higher incidences of injury, maybe we can change their work condition a little bit, make it a little bit easier for them if it's not even feasible right now to provide training for everyone. Maybe try to target those outlying cases if there are such outlying cases. But I think, I just finding that one number so that becomes a target and we try to monitor that over the years becomes important. And I think, that 27% trying to reduce that makes sense in terms of retaining our force, in terms of I don't know, it's the safety and security of the city itself. I think these are important guidelines that we can follow in order to be able to achieve better results. Just that much.
Thank you, Mr. Khachdurian. And thank you, Chief Feely and Mr. Doyle, for your presence and your comments.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Yang.
Sorry. So, all right, 1 down, 6 more to go. But the remaining of the report will be quick, a lot faster than the completed project. So hope you can all see the screen. So the next section is project in progress. So this section provides a brief summary of the project that our team is currently working on. So there are 2 in progress audits we're working on. One is the emergency medical services revenue recovery audit. That one is assigned to Natalie, so she's currently working on that with finance and the Glendale Fire Department. And the other in progress audit is the Glendale Community College parking contract audit that is being worked on by Samil. So hopefully we will be able to present the result of these 2 audits at our next meeting. And the next session is continuous auditing. So during this past quarter, we've completed 2 continuous auditing tests. One is the duplicate payment test, and the other is user access control test, Active Directory. So the results from these 2 tests were provided to the impacted departments for either follow-up actions if there are recommendations, or for their information if no exception identified. So then the Section 4, 5, and 6 are all related to our quarterly follow-up activities. So Section 4 summarizes the implementation status of the outstanding, outstanding items that internal auditors followed up on with department representatives. So for this past quarter, we have followed up with department on 24 outstanding items from 9 audits, so of which 9 items were implemented. So then there were 15 outstanding items remained at the end of the quarter. So Section 5 provides a summary of outstanding priority 1 items. So there are 2 left. So reduced from 3 outstanding items at last quarter. So I'm hoping this will go away by our next meeting. So number 6 provides a summary of outstanding audit items meeting certain discussion criteria. So although we don't have any this quarter, but just for the benefit of our new audit committee members. So this is based on the resolution number 2 by this committee. The department directors or their representatives are requested to discuss the status of any outstanding audit items when any of the 3 events occur. One is if the status changed to not implemented, so basically for any reason that management decided not to implement any audit recommendation, or if any items have not been implemented within 2 years from the report issuance date, or if the item have not been implemented within 3 years of the report issuance date, which means we will default any items 3 years old as not implemented, and we'll stop following up on those items. So last section is
Ms. Sheng,
Yes.
before you go on to that number 7, I just had a question about one of the outstanding priority 1 audit items.
Okay.
So that's in section 5. What exactly is the holdup on the Hoover, Toll, and Keppel recycled water audit?
I think the main reason is the COVID related. So Samil probably can chime in for more information. I think GWP is actively working with the school, but it involves construction, and I think that's the main reason for the delay.
Yeah.
Did you
Mr. Sling?
have anything to add?
Yeah, so the update I got was that just with the schools recently opening for on-campus, there's just a lot going on, and so we just don't, I don't know yet where this falls on their top priority list, but they are working with them. Our legal department is also involved in engaging with them as far as writing up what it is that we expect to do, what it is they expect to do, getting an agreement on that. And once they could hash that out, then they could move on to the actual construction phase. But they have a new manager over there, and we were told there's just a lot going on with COVID and getting schools up and running for in-person schooling. And so that's what I was told.
Okay, got it. And can you explain to me, just remind me, what was it that made this a priority 1 risk? Is it something that can wait for that period of time?
It's a large dollar project that there are some dates involved in it as far as that could impact our reimbursement from the state for funding. So that's why it was a priority one, just given the dollars involved with the project.
And is that anticipated completion date, does that fall within the time period where we won't incur those potential loss of reimbursements?
Yeah, so what I was told is right now, there are many other cities that also are applying for reimbursement, that we are not alone as far as awaiting. It's commonplace as right now as far as all the other participants as well. There's just a lot going on with COVID, and so a lot of stuff was delayed. So.
Got it. Thank you.
So the last section is advisory services. So it provides basically a list of routine team assignments to the 3 committees or team that participated by internal audit. So that's just the routine activity. That concludes my report this afternoon.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Zhang. Any questions regarding this report in general from my fellow committee members?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions.
Chairman Amirian, I have a quick question.
Mr. Khachdurian.
Thank you. So, Ms. Zhang, if you could just go back to item number, was it 6? I think yes, item number 6. Even if it's not possible, okay.
Number
Thank
6.
you. I have a question for you regarding this classification. So if an item is not implemented within 3-year period, what are the consequences? So we just classify it as not implemented, or maybe this is something for a question for Ms. Vartanian to answer. Like, are there any consequences to a department, an entity, not getting sort of a passing grade on an audit report?
Ms. Zhang.
Let me try to answer this. So based on our past experience, we don't really have a lot of recommendations that don't get implemented. Generally speaking, when an item not being implemented after 3 years, sometimes it's involve system implementation. So that will take longer time to implement. So then, and then it's not, we will just let it go. So if there's anything that it's not implemented and we think it's important to be implemented, that probably will come up in our annual risk assessment meetings, and then maybe another audit is needed because things changes very frequently. So any recommendation or audit we did 3 years ago, and they're probably not that relevant or current anymore. So so that will be the scenario.
And Ms. Zhang.
I guess my question is not so much. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chair
Yeah,
Amiri.
and I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Khachdurian, but I imagine the consequence is that the risk identified comes into play and then has whatever deleterious effect on the city. I mean, the internal audit is a tool for the city to identify risks and recommend measures to mitigate them. So in terms of, I'm trying to understand, Mr. Khachdurian, if you mean a consequence, on to the department that is not implementing the suggestion, I think that might just be up to management to identify and evaluate whether or not the leadership in that specific department is dropping the ball, and determine whether, what consequences, as you say, would apply in that case. Am I?
Yeah,
off
another
base on
way
that?
to kind
Ms.
of,
Shen?
say what you just said is basically, if no other reasons, management just decided not to implement any recommendations, that's their call. It's a management decision, and the management decide to assume the risk. Maybe they think the risk is not, maybe they think that it's more costly to mitigate risk than just take the risk. So basically, it's management decision at the end of the day.
Well, my question was more procedural in nature. I think you need to have when you have an audit report and you make recommendations, probably the head of the department or somebody higher up need to sort of respond to that in a formal, at least informal way. And if the decision is that, thank you for this audit report, but we are not going to make the implementation, should that be somehow reported back to the committee with some reasoning? And then, I'm not saying this is ever going to happen, but like, again, this is more of a procedural issue, so that we know, we have the tools and mechanisms in place. But what if this is a really serious matter? Then how do we try to remedy the situation? And
Yeah,
that's why
and
the
Mr.
problem-
Khachdurian, I'm sorry, Ms.
not-
Shen.
Consequence is not a proper, like a good word to use in this case, but I guess something in terms of like what's going to happen next.
I believe, Mr. Khachdurian, that's the reason why we passed resolution number 2,
Right.
which was to have a mechanism after a certain period of time. If one of these 3 events occur, then that would trigger the department head responsible for that specific item to come before the committee and answer, our questions, namely, hey, what's going on? And so I don't think as welcoming as we are, I don't think any department head looks forward to, coming. Michelle, you're not supposed to laugh at that. You're supposed to keep a straight face. They don't look forward to coming before the committee and answering our tough questions. But I think that's exactly what you're referring to, Mr. Khachdurian, is it not?
Yes. But then if eventually the comments or the response is not found to be satisfactory by the committee members, then we stop there. Like, I guess my question is that what is the end point in this process?
May
And
I
maybe
answer
it's that we
Chair
don't
Newman?
have an end point to the process, and that's fine. I was wondering if there is anything.
Is that
Chair
Ms.
Newman, may I
Farpetian?
respond to that? Committee member Khachdurian, you're correct. That is the end of the rope. Once the department director comes before the committee and provides the rationale as to why in his or her business decision it was decided not to pursue a particular recommendation, that's essentially between the department director, potentially the city manager, and then maybe even city council. There's a reporting requirement that the committee implemented in the form of that resolution. And as you know, it happens during a public meeting. And a department director comes through and provides the response, and it ends there.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, in other words, I don't think we have some sort of enforcement mechanism other than, the public's attention. And obviously, we have access and very much thank, management, being here. And I know for a fact the council member that appointed me, diligently watches these meetings and pays attention to what's going on. So, you know, I'm sure then that's up to council and management to then determine, you know, whether or not there's some other mechanism, if they believe that that specific risk that has not been addressed for 3 years and is simply not going to be implemented, you know, if that doesn't, if the road ends at our committee there, maybe they have the opportunity to go on. So, but I appreciate the question, Mr. Khachaturian.
Chair
Mr.
Marion,
Chairman,
if I
I
may.
have a question as well.
Oh, sorry.
Ms. Nazarian, is it related to this?
Yes, it is
Yes,
related
go
to
ahead.
that. I was just wondering, the resolution number 2 that you said that it passed, what was the date that it passed?
Let me look it up right now.
I'm fairly certain I was on the committee that passed it, but I couldn't tell you the date.
Was it in 2021?
No. This was
No,
years
it's a
ago.
long time ago.
This was years ago.
Resolution.
All right.
While you're looking that up, Ms. Flynn, you had a comment?
Yes, Chair Marion and members of the committee. So I just want to also remind everyone that even before we get to that 3-year mark, there's a lot of work that's being done on a quarterly basis with all the open audit issues with each department that has those issues. And in many cases, they're working directly with senior managers and frontline supervisors who are in charge of those operations. That report quarterly goes to the department directors, so they are able to see firsthand what those responses are and what their open audit issues are. The report also goes to the Audit Committee, City Council, as well as our city manager. So there is oversight with regards to those quarterly reports happening on a quarterly basis. And we never had the priority 1, 2, 3 rankings from a long time ago. So that was another thing that was implemented to help everyone kind of gauge the risk level involved with the recommendations that are being made from the audit team. So we do report the priority ones as well to the audit committee, as we talked about here. So you're able to see firsthand every quarter kind of the status on the most risk, the highest risk items. So along the way, as the auditors are working through with the departments, in many cases, things will come up, as Ms. Zhang mentioned. There are also ways to mitigate the risk if they work together and find a different solution that could possibly help resolve it. So those are other things that can happen along the way, which is why internal audit is pretty actively involved in following these recommendations through.
So I found
Thank
it
you,
was
Ms. Van
adopted
Mischen.
in 2014.
October of 2014. Do you see that, Ms. Nazarian?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent.
And I just want to add that actually, you know, following up on the audit, open audit issues is actually a kind of a challenging task amongst the internal audit industry. So then I actually have my peers asked me, you know, how you guys, you know, what kind of a tool do you have actually to make sure that, you know, the recommendations are timely implemented? And I said, we have this very good tool, it's very effective, and, you know, it's our audit committee adopted this resolution. So I actually shared with them, and I said, oh, that's very good information. So maybe they will do something similar too.
Thank you, Ms. Shang. Any further questions on that from committee members? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to the next item, please.
Item number 7, Audit Committee or staff comments.
I will open it up to staff. Any comments from staff? Any comments from my fellow committee members? I'll make a brief comment. I want to welcome Ms. Nazarian. I hope your first meeting was everything you imagined it to be. And if you have any questions please don't hesitate to reach out to Ms. Zhang, and, her and her staff are extremely, extremely responsive in my experience, my long experience on the committee. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to formally welcome you. We're very happy to have, a fourth member of the committee, and hopefully before my retirement, we'll have a fifth member of the committee. Thank you to staff and to all of the city departments that participated today. Again, without their work, I think in comparison to some other cities and what I've seen, the city of Glendale does an excellent job, and our job as an audit committee would probably be much, much more difficult if we didn't have first of all, the excellent audit staff that we do, the internal audit, and second of all, the excellent, city employees that we do. So thank you to all of you. Having concluded that, let's move on to item number 8.
Item number 8, new business.
I'm not sure if this is new business, but it's not, because we mentioned it again. I would just love to hear or get some sort of guidance, information on when we can expect a fifth member of our committee. And, I don't know if it's been 2 years yet. Does resolution 2 apply to the city council? No? It's not an audit finding. No.
I don't believe it.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Taftalian. Yeah, but I would love to get some more information and get an idea of when we can expect to have a full committee, because I do think as we see, item number 4, the approval of minutes, we're missing one committee member and we're unable to approve our minutes. And eventually, I think this will bite us if something does occur and we don't have enough committee members to have a quorum. So, I would love to see a fifth member of the committee at some point. Do I, Ms. Varpetian, do I need to make some sort of motion, or is that enough for that?
Unfortunately, this would not be the appropriate time for that. And if we did have an appropriate time, we would not be able to direct a city council member to take action. But your
I'm asking for information, Ms. Varpetian. Do I need to make a motion in order to get some further information on what the holdup is?
No, we can follow up with the city manager's office and make further inquiries and report back.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the last item, adjournment.
Item number 9, adjournment.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second that.
Excellent. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.